Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my 8.3 Destruction Warlock DPS guide. Now, this is video 1 of 3 in a series covering Destruction, Affliction, and Demonology Warlocks in preparation for 8.3 and Ny'alotha's actual launch. In it, we're going to be covering single target builds, Mythic Plus builds, talents, traits, essences, gear, trinkets, corrupted gear, Azerite, rotations, cooldown usage, pretty much everything you can think of, and probably a few other things as well along the way. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below, or if you want to join me on stream, I'll place a link to my Twitch somewhere on the screen, probably down below here actually, where I stream 6 or so days a week, all my Guild's Hall of Fame progression, and a few random off days in between if you want to join me there and ask live. At the same time, all of the weak auras and profiles you see here will also be available on my Twitch for free if you want to swing by and grab them there. Destruction is looking to be one of the strongest specs in 8.3 and Ny'alotha. The new corruption system and scaling should greatly favor Destro over certain other specs, and a great deal of bosses in Ny'alotha function as exceptional destruction bosses. A big topic of discussion has been the lack of rolling Havoc traits in the raid as far as Azerite goes, but it's important to keep in mind that even though the raid has no rolling Havoc pieces, the Residuum vendor does, and this also includes the Mechagon Azerite coming in 8.3. The large rolling Havoc flashpoint builds might take a bit longer to acquire and build than previous tiers depending on your early Residuum rolls, but it still is a possibility. Even without rolling Havoc traits, certain fights like Skitra and Hive Mind, to name a few, are still prime Destro encounters even running single target builds. In Mythic Plus, we're in a decent spot for 8.3. With corrupted gear and item level scaling, I expect Destro to close the gap between it and Demonology even more so as the patch progresses. The fact that we can actually bring an interrupt to Mythic Plus, unlike Demonology, should also not be overlooked. Our damage profile might not be as strong as Demo's with our 2-minute Infernal compared to a 1-minute Tyrant, but when we actually have our Infernal active, the damage it brings is truly impressive. Let's start off by talking about what single target talents you should be running as Destruction. Now, talking about single target talents for Destro, in the 15 row, our only real generic option that we have here is Flashover. It's a passive and says Conflict Rate deals 25% increased damage and grants 1 additional charge of Backdraft. Now, the 1 extra charge of Backdraft is big both single target wise and is even larger in a sense when it comes to Havoc windows and usage for squeezing in extra Chaos Bolts or Incinerate cast for larger rolling Havoc stacks. Eradication does technically sim pretty well, but min-maxing and maintaining its uptime is sort of a challenge in itself on certain fights, and seeing as how close Flashover is and provides extra utility for Havoc windows and things, Flashover is the de facto choice in the 15 row. Soulfire is just immensely undertuned and a mess in itself. Now, when it comes to the level 30 row for Destruction talents, our only real option here is Reverse Entropy. It's a passive and says your spells have a chance to grant you 15% haste for 8 seconds, so it's like a pseudo Bloodlust, Heroism, or Drums effect, which is very powerful. Internal Combustion is an interesting talent, and I have played with it in the past, and actually have enjoyed the playstyle a good bit, but it's not really where you want to be for a lot of reasons. There's not really any encounters or places you'll use Shadowburn as far as like raid fights go. There's some utility in Mythic Plus when it comes to explosive weeks like this week and sniping orbs with it and getting a refund back quickly, but you're going to be taking Reverse Entropy every time in the 30 row here. In the 45 row, we have the option of Demon Skin, Burning Rush, or Dark Pact, and this is a utility row of sorts here. The majority of the time, I'll have Burning Rush when it comes to raid content. That extra movement speed at a small life loss every few seconds is very, very powerful for moving out of abilities, moving before abilities even come at you, pre-planning, and things of the sort. Destruction is very immobile. It is the least mobile spec of all 3 Warlock specs, so having that extra movement is very strong. I will say that when it comes to Demon Skin or Dark Pact, I feel a good portion of the time the player base takes Demon Skin, where Dark Pact is essentially a better option on fights like Mythic Ashvane progression or even Mythic Queen's Court, when you have certain parts in the fight where you want a shorter CD that gives you a bit of extra survivability, versus Demon Skin giving you extra survivability in parts of the fight where you don't necessarily need it as much. In the 60 row for Destruction, we have the option of Cataclysm, Fire and Brimstone, or Inferno. Now, I will start off saying that Inferno is an actual dumpster fire, and Fire and Brimstone is pretty undertuned. This is more or less our AoE-based row here, but the thing is that Cataclysm is our best choice when it comes to multiple stack targets, cleave, whether you're in Mythic Plus or raiding. And Cataclysm is the only spell here that actually is a DPS gain single target-wise as well. You do want to cast Cataclysm on cooldown, regardless of if your Immolate is within Pandemic range or not. The fact that it refreshes Immolate means if you have one ticking with 8 or 7 seconds left outside of Pandemic range, it'll refresh it to its max value. It also gains more value in raids when certain ads are spawning, fights where you can grip multiple adds with either Sigil of Chains, DK Grip, similar to like Hive Mind, and then Cataclysm, all those adds, it's a very, very large DPS increase. It will, will bring in an insane amount of shard generation with all those emulates rolling. 75 row is another utility row here. We have Dark Fury, Mortal Coil, or Demonic Circle. When it comes to raiding, the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, Demonic Circle is going to be the choice you want to make. We mentioned before that when we talked about the 45 row, that Destruction is a really mobile spec. It's the least mobile of all 3 Warlock specs. So when we have mechanics that we know are coming in X amount of time, and we can plan our movement with our Demonic Circle or with Burning Rush, it's very, very impactful damage-wise. You want to min-max your movement as much as possible, in general, playing whatever spec, but especially at Destruction. And there's typically, you'll be hard-pressed to find a fight where you don't gain value using Demonic Circle in some way, shape, or form. Now, when looking at the 90 row as far as Destro goes in raids, we technically have 3 options in Grimoire Supremacy, Grimoire Sacrifice, and Roaring Blaze, but our only real competitive option is Grimoire Supremacy. It's a passive and says, when you have your Infernal active, every soul shard you spend increases the damage of your Chaos Bolt by 8 seconds. Now, seeing as how in 8.2, we began running Vision of Perfection either as a major or a minor, but we have that minor aspect somewhere in our build, Supremacy gained even more value when paired with a Crashing Chaos trait for a 2-minute Infernal build, essentially, instead of 3. When you actually push, this lasts a full 30 seconds, the full duration of your Infernal, and when you push back your Dark Soul cooldown and other trinket base CDs or just CDs in general, you gain even more value towards the end of your Supremacy window. Seeing as how Dark Soul is also a 2-minute CD, technically Faunt is a 2-minute CD if you're still running Faunt, and maybe another on-use trinket, depending on if you're stacking them or not. Supremacy is a very, very, very strong single target talent, and even gains value in Havoc windows too if you have your Infernal out, whether it's a VOP proc or your actual player-bound Infernal. And finally, in the 100 row, we have Soul Conduit, Channel Demon Fire, or Dark Soul Instability. Your only real choice here is going to be Dark Soul Instability. Like we just mentioned, it pairs very, very, very well with your 2-minute Infernal CD, Supremacy windows, things of the sort, and it lines up basically every time you use your Infernal. Even though you push back your Supremacy 10 seconds into your Infernal, the 2-minute Infernal build is essentially like 2 minutes and 12 seconds or so with our 70 neck. It'll be further reduced later on when our neck gets higher and we get a further VOP percentage cooldown reduction, but it pairs very, very well with every Infernal, every Supremacy window. It's just a strong talent overall. Alright, now when we're actually looking at Mythic Plus talents and not just raid single target based talents, actually not much really changes. In the 15 row, Flashover, like we mentioned, provides a lot of value with Havoc, and Havoc is a much bigger thing when it actually comes to Mythic Plus. You're going to have options for Havoc windows basically every single trash pack, and a handful of bosses too. Eradication and Soulfire, you don't want to be really anywhere near them as far as Plus goes. The 30 row, Reverse Entropy once again. The minor Bloodlust Heroism effect is really strong. If it actually procs in Havoc windows, it's even stronger. Those are the double conflag 4 Chaos Bolt windows. If you get all the things to overlap, you can squeeze in 4 Chaos Bolts typically pretty easy. Combustion is not where you want to be again for multiple reasons. And Shadowburn, like I mentioned in the previous talent discussion, there are weeks like Explosive Week where you can get some value out of Shadowburn. Double sniping an explosive orb with Shadowburn, because normally one is not enough to kill it, will essentially get them both refunded back to you. There is some value there, but honestly, you're better off just having other people in the group kill them, or use a conflag on them and focus on the priority trash mobs at hand. The 45 row, Demon Skin, Burning Rush, Dark Pact. It's pretty similar to how it was raid-wise. Burning Rush is fine when it comes to keys. When we get into the higher key territory, like 17, 18 plus range, Tyrannical Fortified, you can gain a lot of extra value with Dark Pact. Having a 1-minute CD for fights that are pretty damage heavy, like the final boss of Tolagor, the first boss in Temple of Sethralus, is really, really big. It helps negate a lot of damage coming in from certain abilities, especially if you offset it with actual ending resolve from time to time. 60 row, Inferno, Fire and Brimstone, Cataclysm. Once again, even though we are in like a much higher, larger AoE setting, Fire and Brimstone is still undertuned damage-wise, unfortunately. And I don't think a single Warlock entire expansion has played with Inferno. If you have, I'm sorry to hear it. Cataclysm is where you want to be. Once again, single target damage gain and a very, very, very powerful spell to open on in a trash pack, whether you're running, flashpoint traits or not. It'll apply Immolate to every single mob that it hits. So heading into the trash pack, you open on Cataclysm, flashpoint procs right into a rolling Havoc window, unless you have an Infernal or something coming down, and you can just crank. It's a lot of initial burst damage, and having An ability like this that just can apply your main dot really quickly versus something like Seed of Corruption with Affliction having to cast, travel, and then pop is very powerful, and one of the reasons why Destruction is a pretty decent choice in Mythic Plus currently, even though Demo's probably a little better, it depends. 75 row, utility row. I mentioned Demonic Circle being the de facto choice in raiding most of the time because Mortal Coil and Dark Fury don't really have a whole lot of applications. When it comes to Mythic Plus, though, that changes. Mortal Coil essentially horrifies an enemy. It's a pseudo self-heal on a pretty short CD. It can get you out of certain tight spots in a pinch. You can use Demonic Circle at times. There are certain things where you can min-max with it almost in every fight, similar to how raiding is. But seeing as how trash is such a big part of Mythic Plus, arguably bigger than bosses a good bit of the time, depending on fortified tyrannical settings, Mortal Coil and or Dark Fury are typically the options that I'll take if I remember to change them before the key starts. Shadow Fury sees a decent bit of use as well, and plus having a reduced CD is pretty big too. So my choice here would probably be either Mortal Coil or Dark Fury, probably leaning a bit more towards Dark Fury. 90 row Roaring Blaze, Sacrifice, Supremacy. If you actually do choose to run Sacrifice, I don't recommend it. The damage does not scale with multiple targets. You can hit a training dummy and see that it deals the same amount of damage on one target or 800 targets at the same time. Roaring Blaze also does not stack. It'll refresh. It doesn't increase the duration. There's no pandemic, and it does not stack. So, personally, seeing as how most of the time Mythic Plus, I'll play a Vision of Perfection major build as Destruction, I like Supremacy here. Your VOP-based Infernal still proc Supremacy to give you a 10-second Supremacy window, essentially. And if you proc an Infernal, when you have your player-bound Infernal out for that big whole 30-second Supremacy window it gives you, the VOP ones extend that window by 10 seconds. There's been times in Plus where I've had a Supremacy window rolling for over a minute. You just get, it just stacks and stacks and stacks. RNG is RNG, but Supremacy is still where you want to be. And finally in the 100 row, we have Soul Conduit, Channel Demon Fire, or Dark Soul Instability. I still feel Dark Soul is the case here, the choice here. There have been some people playing with Channel Demon Fire, like on teaming, fortified weeks and stuff like that. I still feel overall Dark Soul is where you want to be. Immolation Aura, especially with VOP, will deal a lot of damage regardless in trash packs. And Dark Soul, pairing it with your Infernal on bosses, brings so much extra value compared to something like Channel Demon Fire. When it comes to Azerite Traits for Destruction, not a whole lot has really changed since 8.2, but there are a few intricacies that I figured would be best to discuss here when looking at Azerite Traits as a whole. Crashing Chaos is a strong Azerite trait for Destruction, as it both buffs the damage your next 8 Chaos Bolts do after summoning your Infernal, as well as reduces the Infernal's cooldown by 15 seconds. When paired with Vision of Perfection, the Essence, this trait enables the 2-minute Infernal build for Destruction. It's important to note that the CD reduction does not stack with 2 or 3 traits of Crashing Chaos, but the bonus damage indeed does. Both Chaotic Inferno and Chaos Shards are traits that are strong at 1 stack, however lose value at 2 and 3 due to the proc chance not stacking. Traits like Loyal to the End, Heart of Darkness, and Bursting Flare are solid single-target choices as well as multi-target choices, and they indeed stack for the full value at 2 and 3 traits. A typical single-target Destro build will look something like 1 Crashing Chaos, 1 Chaotic Inferno, 1 Chaos Shards, and then a mix of stat-based traits like Heart of Darkness or Bursting Flare. Chaotic Inferno still gains a lot of value at 2 stacks, even without the instant cast Incinerate buff stacking, due to 2-minute Infernals, Supremacy, and other aspects when you have that buff Chaos Bolt damage. So be sure to take that into account when simming your actual gear set. When it comes to Havoc Cleave-based builds, the Rolling Havoc Azerite trait is extremely powerful as long as you can make good use of your Havoc windows on fights where there are adds throughout or 2 permanent targets like Queen's Court. The stacking intellect buff it grants you is both powerful in said Havoc window as well as outside of it when the window is closed, single target wise. Rolling Havoc has only further solidified Destro as the king of 2-target cleave in BFA. Mythic Plus also offers a great deal of opportunities for some large Rolling Havoc windows on trash and sometimes bosses, making it a strong choice there. Flashpoint's a very interesting trait as well in itself, as it's one that gains a lot of value if there are targets or adds above 80% health for a long portion of the fight. Fights like Queen's Court, Orgozoa, and Zakul provided a great deal of Flashpoint uptime in Eternal Palace, and Ny'alotha appears to have a great deal of Flashpoint-based fights present as well. Destruction's main single target essence build runs Memory of Lucid Dreams as your major essence, typically supplemented with Vision and Perfection and Focusing Iris as your minors. In 8.3, however, we are gaining access to a 4th essence slot at 75 on our necks, and Destro has a few potential options in Conflict and Strife, Crucible of Flame, and Breath of the Dying to fill said void. Breath of the Dying is a new essence in 8.3, and is essentially a less RNG version of Crucible of Flame. Its damage also increases dramatically once your target falls below 20% health, where it far surpasses anything the Crucible of Flame could do. Conflict and Strife is a simple damage increase and gains extra value in fights where there are multiple targets and you can make good use of Havoc. It's also a strong option in Mythic Plus with this build, as it is a flat damage reduction as well. Vision of Perfection as a major is another strong choice we have as Destruction for both Mythic Plus and raid encounters, mainly with 2 or more targets to take advantage of Havoc. If you're able to proc a VOP based Infernal before you enter your Havoc window, you bring the Crushing Chaos stacks as well as Supremacy into that for a large DPS increase. I prefer the VOP major base build for Mythic Plus due to VOP Infernals bring Immolation Aura value to trash packs, as well as Crushing Chaos stacks and small Supremacy windows for Havoc. The VOP major build typically runs Lucid Dreams and Focusing Iris as minors. As mentioned, the VOP build is normally played in Mythic Plus and Havoc based encounters, which is where Conflict and Strife gains a lot of raw value. If you are playing this build single target wise for whatever reason, then minors like Breath of the Dying or Crucible of Flame are worth simming in the final minor slot that you get at 75 on your neck. A cool thing about this build is that if you actually proc a VOP based Infernal while your player bound Infernal is active, it adds 10 seconds to your Supremacy timer. There's no limit to how much this can stack, and I've had it exceed a minute of Supremacy many times in the past. Supremacy does cap at 20 stacks, but spamming Chaos Bolts for a full 30 seconds at max stacks brings an absurd amount of damage. The downside here is that there's a lot of RNG with this build, which is something not everyone loves. At times you will have multiple Inferno procs, and other times you can go for a long period without any. When it comes to actual progression, you're given the choice between these two builds. The Lucid Dreams build will bring more consistent damage from pull to pull, but the VOP based builds have a much higher upside. The opener you want to follow when playing the Lucid Dreams major build of Destruction starts off with precasting your Font of Power if you have one, and do a precast Incinerate and then Cataclysm on pull. Follow that up with a Conflict Rate cast and summon your Infernal. I typically then cast a Chaos Bolt, Conflag again, and another Chaos Bolt depending on shard refunds. You then want to follow the normal build and spend rotation until you have about 21 seconds remaining on your Infernal. You then refresh your Immolate and pop Dark Soul, then Lucid Dreams, your Berserking Ratio if you're a troll, and dump as many Chaos Bolts as you can. If you're close to shard capping in between your Dark Soul and Lucid usage, you can weave in a Chaos Bolt to avoid overcapping, but with the insane shard generation we have while under the effect of our Infernal and Lucid Dreams, it happens from time to time. You will want to weave in Conflag cast here when it's off CD for the backdraft charges, and can typically toss in a free Incinerate cast if you're running the Chaotic Inferno Azerite trait and are low on shards. At times, you will be able to pretty much spam Chaos Bolt for the entire duration of Lucid Dreams, while sometimes you will need to cast an Incinerate or two depending on shard refunds and RNG. Refreshing your Immolate before you go into CDs ensures that it does not fall while you're in the middle of your CD burst window. Be sure to also cast Cataclysm on cooldown regardless of Immolate being in pandemic range or not, as it's still a single target DPS gain. This is typically the build you run on single target bosses as Destro, and it brings with it a tremendous amount of burst damage every 2 minutes thanks to running VOP as a minor essence and the Crashing Chaos Azerite trait. It's important to not overcap on actual shards while under the effect of Lucid Dreams if at all possible. RNG is RNG though, and at times you'll essentially just sit at around 4 shards through multiple Chaos Bolt casts. Just be sure to keep your Conflag play tight, and remember the Conflag reduces Incinerate's cast time as well, and it's perfectly acceptable to follow the sequencing of Conflag into double Incinerate. You don't have to save Conflag charges just for a Chaos Bolt cast, single target wise. The Vision of Perfection major build for Destruction actually opens in a pretty similar way. You still want to follow the same opening sequence of precast Font into precast Incinerate and Cataclysm on pull. Cast a Conflict Rate, drop your Infernal, and dump a few Chaos Bolts, depending on shards and refunds. You then have a few seconds of building shards before wanting to refresh your Immolate at about 21 seconds remaining on your Infernal. You then pop your Dark Soul cooldown and Berserking if you're a troll, and dump as many Chaos Bolts as possible. You are not running Lucid Major here, so your shard generation will not be anywhere near as strong, but you do have the chance of actually proccing extra Infernals during your opener. Doing so actually extends your Supremacy window from your player bound Infernal by 10 whole seconds. It is worth noting that if you do proc an Infernal in the first 10 seconds of your player around the Infernal being cast and active, you can leverage that additional 10 seconds of Supremacy by pushing back your Dark Soul cooldown 10 seconds or so. You will still essentially be popping it at 20 seconds remaining on Supremacy, but you will have more stacks of Supremacy due to the extended window. Outside of that, you just follow the typical build and spend rotation that Destruction has. If you know a Havoc window is coming up soon, you typically will pull to 3.5 or so shards and then enter it with a conflag charge so you can min-max your cleave damage. If you proc a VOP based Infernal here, you do indeed receive the bonus of Supremacy, which really amps up your damage even more. Destruction is the actual king of 2-target cleave when inside a Havoc window, and to be honest, there's not a whole lot to the actual Havoc windows themselves. You want to set up for your Havoc by pulling up to about 4 shards, then applying Havoc to one target. Swap to the other and cast Conflag into double Chaos Bolt. At this point, you should have your second Conflag coming off CD, which you can then cast and then typically go right into another Chaos Bolt. Havoc does generate twice the amount of actual resources than you do single target, so double Conflag, triple Chaos Bolt windows are pretty easy to come by with the proper setup. As far as cooldown usage goes for Trash and Mythic Plus, you typically want to open on Cataclysm into Infernal, into your CDs, and then a Havoc window. You should be able to squeeze in 3 Chaos Bolts as well as a few other casts if under the effects of Backdraft and Flashpoint. If the pack will actually live for a decent while, you can push your CDs outside of your Infernal back a bit later, but remember that Havoc's on a 30-second cooldown, so you're only getting one window regardless during your Infernal, and also leaving Havoc off cooldown for a bit as well. It is worth noting that Rain of Fire is a DPS increase at 3 or more targets outside of a Havoc window, and a DPS increase at 5 or more targets regardless of Havoc. Rain of Fire does also stack, but if there's a priority mob in the pack, it will most likely be worth focusing down with Chaos Bolt instead of padding, in a sense, with Rain of Fire. Corruption is the new system being introduced in 8.3. At this point in time, we are a few days away from the patch launching, however there's still a bit of tuning being done to certain corrupted effects, mainly the damage-based ones and not stat procs. Now I want to emphasize that these sims I have run using my own profile from 8.2, so the overall DPS does not reflect 8.3's numbers. Also keep in mind that these are early sims based around the most recent PTR build we have, and all things are subject to change. I'll most likely release another video in the coming weeks clarifying corruption once everything settles down. Regardless of that, here are the corruption sims and values that I have for Destruction Warlocks. Honed Mind, Racing Pulse, and Surging Vitality are pretty close to one another at the top of the charts, but keep in mind that you need to actually take damage to proc Surging Vitality. Each of these traits was simmed at a tier 3 level, with it being the only corrupted effect in the actual profile. Now I have to admit that I was a bit surprised seeing Deadly Momentum as low as it is, especially with how crit functions for Destro, but the trait does not provide as much of a raw value increase as the other traits do, and seeing as how Mastery is also important and directly affects our damage as a whole, it starts to make a bit more sense. The Severe Corrupted effect grants us a bonus to our crit rating based off how much crit we currently have, and it does stack with multiple effects, so it gains more raw value than most traits when stacking crit gear. I will place this sim and a few other links in the description if you want to take a look at it for yourself or run your own sims with them. Seeing the Mastery, Haste, and even Versatility procs that close to one another at the top is actually a good thing though, as it makes acquiring the corrupted effects we want a whole lot easier. As far as stat weights go in actual gear sims, the best way to tell where your own individual character is sitting is a raidbots.com top gear sim. It will take all of your current gear into account as well as other options if selected and give you the highest actual stat you have available. Stat weights fluctuate a bit between different characters and often shift a great deal when trying to compensate for one in a stat weight sim, so top gear is the actual way to go. Thanks for watching guys. I hope this video gave you all a better understanding of how Destruction Warlock looks heading into 8.3, both in Mythic Plus and actual Ny'alotha. Now don't forget, I will be releasing the Affliction Warlock and Demonology Warlock guides within the next few days or so before the patch launches, so if you want to see those, be sure to smash the subscribe button and come back in a few days to check them out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and like I said, I'll be sure to get back to you, or if you want to join me live on stream, feel free to do so. If you want to grab any weak auras or profiles, they're there for you as well, and I'm happy to help there too. Thanks for all the support guys, and I'll see y'all again soon. Peace.